Well, I guess let's get started. My name is George Dunlap, and I'm a committer. I have a couple of people coming in. So basically, maintainers would love to have more people to help review the code. So we've had a lot of more people contributing. If you've seen Xen, Lars' stats, the numbers keep going up. But a lot of people who are not committers, sorry, not maintainers, don't really know where to start. And one of the things I hear a lot, people say, since I'm not a maintainer, if I say, yes, this looks good, that doesn't help it get checked in. If I say, no, this doesn't look good, is anyone going to listen to me? Why does my opinion matter? Basically, why should anyone listen to me? And I think that question itself basically demonstrates the problem because it's the wrong question. So basically, we have an array of states that a patch can be in. We can have a patch which is absolutely perfect, right? The code is gorgeous and beautiful, and you read the change log and it makes you weep, right? Because it's so moving. We don't need to be quite that good. We just need to be ready to be checked in, which is close to that, but not quite. And what a maintainer does when he gives things reviews, he's very rarely is it just he's checking to see that it's ready to be checked in. But usually what happens is he's trying to move it from not so ready to being ready. And even people who are long-time contributors, who are regulars, I mean even people who are committers or maintainers on the project, very rarely is that they submit a patch and it is immediately ready to be checked in. It's almost always got some things that need to be sort of tweaked or improved or moved around on it. So the answer is, how can you help a maintainer? You can help maintainers by anything you can do to move it from the not so ready side towards the ready to be checked in side will help reduce the amount of work that the maintainer has to do. So if you want to help review and you are not a maintainer, then anything you can do to help the patch closer to being ready to be checked in, that is going to be one less thing the maintainer has to do. Now, saying that, there's an caveat. We want to move it towards being ready to be checked in, but not away, right? So if you come in, someone posts a patch and you say, I think you should do this, and actually the maintainer later has to come and say, actually that's a bad idea, don't do it the other way, then you're actually adding to the maintainer's workload, right? So giving feedback that the maintainer has to contradict is harmful, right? So I guess when you're doing review, if you're going to try and do a review, learn what kinds of things the maintainer likes to do first, right? So if you're going to learn, say, choose an area of the hypervisor or the code that you want to learn about, that you have an interest in, that you already have some things that you know, and when someone posts a patch touching that area of the code, do your own little private review and say, this is what I would have written if I was going to do a public review, and then compare what you wrote to what the maintainer wrote. Maybe the maintainer missed something that you should actually come out and say, actually, there's a bug in this thing. But at least it gives you an idea. And once you have a reasonable amount of confidence that you know the kinds of things the maintainer would say, then saying it first so the maintainer doesn't have to say it can be quite helpful. That said, there's an awful temptation. So there's a huge amount of sort of unwritten rules about how a patch should be, right? And if you are kind of on the inside and you know this big set of rules, there's an awful, awful temptation to beat up on the new guy, right? So someone comes in, they build a patch, and you're like, ha, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. Ha, so please, even if you're not a mean person, sometimes people sort of do that. And even if you don't mean to do that, sometimes it can come off that way, right? So be on your guard against that. Don't use the rules to beat up the new guy. The second thing, and this is something that even long-term maintainers fall into, right? Because we're trying to get it toward a place where it can be checked in. But how you do that is you look for all the things that are wrong. And it's easy in your mind to switch from trying to get it ready to be checked in into trying to find things that are wrong with it. You know what I'm saying? So it's a subtle difference, but it is not your job as a reviewer to find something that is wrong. And sometimes I think even maintainers feel like if I haven't found something wrong with it to the change, that I haven't actually done my job. And that's it's something that I think new reviewers can fall into too, right? So you say, well, I'm going to review, I'm going to look for all the things that are wrong, and that's kind of the wrong attitude. So the right attitude is Your job is as a maintainer or as someone who's reviewing it to help a maintainer, is to move it closer to be ready to be checked in. Now there's some exceptions to this rule, but basically if you are reviewing actual code, by the time you hit the point where you're reviewing actual code, your goal is to help this patch get checked in. And any criticism that you do should be with the goal of helping it get checked in. And I think that'll help, hopefully that'll help you sort of the attitude with which you come to it, and then that'll make it a lot easier for the people who are having their things reviewed. Okay, so what does it mean? What does it need to be checked in? So this is there's a lot of different areas, and I'm just going to go through quickly and try and summarize here. This is I've called this the reviewing hierarchy, and the point here is that there's things. It's a bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, except that it's kind of pointed up instead of pointed down, because there's no point in doing things at the top if the level below it or if the level below us aren't ready. So there's no point in doing super detailed nitpicking of the coding style if the algorithm is wrong and you're going to have to rewrite the code anyway. There's no point in picking over details of the algorithm and trying to optimize this and that if the architecture is wrong, if it's in the wrong, if you're changing completely the wrong part of the code, or if the interface is wrong, and you're going to have to change all that stuff anyway. And there's no point in messing around with giving criticisms of the architecture and the interface if the patch itself isn't even necessary, right? So when you go through the review process, sort of start at the bottom and work your way up, and don't. If you have reason to believe there's something missing at a lower part, don't move on to the higher part. Now, because everybody makes mistakes, so if you look at it and you think the architecture is fine and you start doing giving feedback on the algorithm, and then later the maintainer comes along and says, actually, I think the architecture is completely wrong. Well, okay, that's fair enough. I mean, don't worry about that. But if you look at it and you look at the architecture and you say, I'm not sure this is bad. I'm not, then I have some suspicion that the maintainer wouldn't like this. If you're sure that you think it's bad, go ahead and say so. If you're not sure, then I would say just pause and don't make the submitter go through all the work of doing all the sort of coding style and stuff, only to have them throw away all that work when the maintainer comes along and says, actually, the architecture is wrong. You need to do it some entirely different way anyway. Right? Does that make sense? It's kind of take some risks, but be a little bit careful. Okay. Let's go through these individuals. So first of all, is this patch necessary to accomplish their goals? Right. So first of all, is it clear what the goal of the patch is? This is when you read the patch, do you know what these are trying to accomplish? And second of all, in order to accomplish their goal, do you actually need to make a functional change, or could they do it some other way? Is there existing functionality that they could use? Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with adding functionality if adding functionality is the best way to accomplish their goal, right? So this is not there's not a super high bar for this, but it always is worth stepping back and saying, is there some other way that this guy this person could submit their accomplish their goal in an easier way? And usually everyone's more, if there is an easier way, then people are happy to do that. So the next thing is take a look at the architecture and the interface. Is this way that they're going about it, is this the best way to solve the problem? Is this the best part of the code to modify? Okay, is it better in the VMX code, in the HVM code, in the more generic code? Is this the right level of abstraction? And a lot of this stuff with the interface is kind of you have taste that you build up over time. So think about it, think about how you might change it, and then pay attention to what the maintainer says. So is the interface general enough? Is the interface too general? Is it forward compatible? Or are you baking things in that we're going to have to live with for the rest of the project? Then take a look at the code itself. So functionality, it's trying to do something. Does it actually accomplish what it's trying to do? Is it doing it in the most efficient way? Could it be doing it in a different way? Are all the corner cases handled correctly? So I want to say if you go through and do a review and you do a reviewed by, I think try to be at least 90% sure that if you do a reviewed by, that there are no bugs in it. So if you say reviewed by and the architecture is wrong, that's no problem. If you say reviewed by and you missed some coding style stuff or readability stuff, that's not a big deal. Okay, but if you say reviewed by and there's consistently more than 10% of the time you say reviewed by and there's a bug, then the maintainer's probably going to start ignoring your reviewed by. I mean, everyone makes mistakes, so if it's just keep it kind of low. But like before you give your reviewed by, be reasonably confident that you've got all the bugs fixed. And the next is just a huge level of so you've got you figure out it's necessary, you've got the architecture right, you've got the algorithm basically right. Now you're looking at just not the functionality of the code, but the other qualities about the code and the patch itself. So maintainability and robustness. And a lot of the times this is just kind of experience. What kinds of things work going forward or not? So is the code clear? Is it appropriately commented? Does it duplicate some other part of functionality? Would it be better if these two bits of functionality were refactored to share the code? Does the code make hidden assumptions, which are true right now, but later might change? So for instance, is it assuming that this array is going to be 2 elements long, and at some point later someone's going to make it 3 elements long, and then the code's not going to have that assumption anymore? Should those assumptions be checked, or should those assumptions have an assert, so checked and handled if it's not always going to be true, or should it have an assert just to say this always should be true, and if it ever changes, we want the hypervisor to crash so we immediately can fix it. Does it introduce parts of code which need to be kept in sync with other parts of code, so that at some point later there's like a trap where someone is going to change this part of the code and forget to change this other part of the code? Or any other kinds of traps. So what we're looking for is traps that people might fall into, such that when people look at the code, they make what seems to be an innocent change, and they introduce a bug, or worse yet, some sort of a vulnerability. Then coding style. Basically, there's these files, coding style. So that there's the top level coding style, which governs most of the project, and then there's the tools libxl coding style, which covers just the stuff inside libxl. And just for fun, they're fairly different. So go through and find out what the coding style is. And so here, this is a thing that's actually quite simple to do, and it's actually quite useful because a lot of the maintainers are really actually quite picky with the coding style. So learn your maintainer, what kinds of things he's picky about, and then if all you do is take a look at it, it looks right to you, and you help the person fix all the little coding style things before the maintainer has to, then you've helped them. Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of ways in which this, if you just lurk on the list, you'll see lots of coding style criticism, so you can learn a lot of the things that need to be done. So the patch itself, you need to make sure that it has an informative one-line changelog, the thing at the top, and you need to make sure that the changelog itself has appropriate, like the motivation is described, and all the important changes in the patch are mentioned. So you want to make sure that if someone is just looking at the changelog, they have a decent idea of all the things that are happening in the patch. And if this patch has been reposted, this is version 2, version 3, version 10, that you have changes since the previous revision are listed in the patch. And that, if appropriate, if there were reviewed bys and act bys in previous versions of the patch, and then there's been significant changes, that such that those reviewed bys and act bys should be dropped, then help those to be dropped. Sorry, does everyone, when I say reviewed bys and act bys, does that make sense to people? So, what's that? Explain it? Yes. Okay. So the reviewed bys and act bys are part of the, I forget what it's called. Basically, it's part of the sort of due diligence to make sure the open source projects have the copyright stuff for the open source project is appropriate. So when you say, no, so that's not right. I'm getting mixed up. Anyway, so the Xen, like Linux, has a post-review check-in order of the process, right? So each area of the code will have a maintainer, and the rule is that a patch cannot be checked in unless at least one maintainer from each of the different areas of code that's been touched, gives it at least an ACK. So ACK means, act by basically means, so you say act by George Dunlap, that's what I would write. And act by means, I'm okay with this. Reviewed by is like the next level up. So reviewed by means I have taken a very detailed look at this, and everyone makes mistakes, but as far as I know, I've done my due diligence, and I'm pretty sure this is ready to be checked in. So if you are going to, if you're going to help review, then so act by is really only appropriate for what? It's appropriate in two cases. The one place it's appropriate is if you're a maintainer, right? Because it can't go in without at least your ACK, preferably your review. But if you just come out of the blue and say act by some patch, people are going to say, okay, that's nice. I mean, again, I don't know. That doesn't mean much. Reviewed by means I've taken a close look at this and I think it's ready to be checked in. So if you've done a reviewed by and nobody knows you, well, that's a little bit of data point, right? But if people know that your reviewed bys matter, so if you've done 25 reviews and only one of those reviews has a bug in it, one of the patches that you've said reviewed by to has a bug in it, then when you come and say reviewed by, then I as a maintainer, I feel like, right, okay, well, I don't have to look terribly closely because I know this guy's pretty, this person is pretty reliable. And the main thing is that reviewed by and act by are for specific versions of the patch. And usually, if you're doing like little tiny changes, like, well, okay, we're reformatting this a little bit, or we're changing this, the comment here a little bit, or whatever, then you can just keep the reviewed by and the act bys. That's not a big thing. But if you see significant changes to the patch, then just because the person approved the previous version of the patch doesn't mean the person still approves the new version of the patch. Does that make sense? I mean, just kind of look on the list and see what kind of things people say. Different people have different levels of it. Usually what will happen is, so usually only really tiny minor changes can retain an ACK. So this would be like, white space changes or like comments or something like that. Usually if there's any significant amount of, like almost any functional change, usually you have to drop the ACK. The exception would be often people will say, I would do it like you've done it this way. I would do it the other way. I don't care which way you do it, so you can have an ACK either way. And then if you or someone else might say, so say that you post a patch, and then Frediano here says you should do it the other way, and then I come along and say either way is fine with me, Act A or Act B. So then, if you resend the patch, taking Frediano's advice, you can now put my ACK there because I've said other way works. Does that make sense? But if you just kind of look on the list, you'll see what people do. You'll get the hang of this sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, because we're sort of old school, we just use the email stuff. Basically, what you have to do is, if there's significant comments, you have to look through the old reviews and then see if that they're checked to make sure that they're fold up in the new thing. Now, and this is why normally what you should do is you put the changes, right? So ideally what would happen is you send a patch, Frediano and I both give you some feedback, and then version 2 of the patch. So Git has a thing where you have the title and the change set, and if you put 3 dashes, dash, 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 everything below that, between the 3 dashes and the actual patch gets ignored when you check it in. So what you do is you use that space to give information that's not supposed to be checked in to Git, but is just information for the people reviewing it. And so usually what you do in there is you say, okay, version 2 changes since version 1, and then you say, I addressed this comment, this comment, this comment. And then when Frediano and I come to review your patch a second time, we're just going to skim through it, and we see that you've made all the changes we asked for, and then we don't have to look super closely. That's one of the things that takes a lot of time, right? So if you have someone who habitually misses comments, one of the things you can do to help a maintainer is to notice that they've missed the comments and point it out, because then basically, when I come to it again, I could just see that you've said you missed this, this, and this, and I can say, right, okay, well, I'll wait for version I'll wait for the next version because obviously they haven't addressed all the comments that they've already been given. Okay. Here. So when you're writing a patch, so how do you know what it means to have a good patch? And so there are three different audiences that you have when you're writing a patch. Looking at the header and the comment thing. The first of all is obviously the reviewers. The reviewers are trying to figure out what the patch does, and so you want to have the motivation, you want to have a high-level overview of what it does, and you want to make sure to have all the little details. If it has these little side changes, all the little side changes that are not directly related to what the patch says should also be listed in the patch in the commentary. You also want to make sure the patch is useful for someone who's just scanning through a whole slew of patches to find out which patches might be interesting to them, right? So this could be someone who is, they just want to see what's been checked in. They're looking for changes to area of the hypervisor that they care about. So for instance, I'm not the maintainer for the systemd integration stuff in Xen, but because I maintain one of the CentOS packages that uses systemd, I care about changes that get made to it, right? So you can help me find those by making sure that if it changes the systemd part of the package, that the first line comment says systemd somewhere in it, or init script, or whatever it is, right? So that I know this might be of interest to me, and then I can take a deeper look. People who are looking for bug fixes to backport, right? People who are looking for, like, they have a bug and they want to see if someone else has already submitted a patch to fix the bug, right? So people scanning for patches that are important to them. So you want to make sure that the first line, the one-line comment, has enough information that anyone looking for this patch should be able to find it quickly. And finally, you want to help out archaeologists. So sometime in the distant future, there may be someone who is trying to figure out what on earth is this code doing and why is it the way that it is. And then when they want to come back in time and do some archaeology on the Git tree and find out how it got to be this way. So it's the same kind of thing, making sure that you have an appropriate description of what the problem was and what you were trying to do, and the main patch itself will really help them. So think of these people when you're looking at the patch. And then patch series, is the patch series broken down appropriately? Is it in too many different pieces? Is it in not enough pieces? Make sure that don't just look at the end product, make sure there's no regressions that happen in the middle of the series. Sometimes people will send stuff like they'll code something up and it'll have a bug in it, and they'll fix that bug in a later patch in the series. That's a no-no. Or they'll introduce some function, they'll break their patch series down. First we'll add this bit, then we'll add this bit. So the thing will compile if you have both bits, but if you have only the first bit, it won't compile because it depends on something that's on the second bit, right? So that's also a no-no. Compile, and they should have no regressions from the previous patches. Let me just fix this here. So they will almost always be checked in together. The thing is this. The main reason you don't want to have, first of all, is just to make sure that you're thinking clearly. But second of all, you want to make sure as much as possible to avoid breaking bisections. Right. So in a bisection, it's often the case that something worked for you at this point, and then you do a pull. Maybe you're working on something, you get involved in it for like a couple weeks, and then you do a pull and you're based to whatever the main line is, and it doesn't work anymore. So somewhere in the 250 commits between the last time you pulled and this time you pulled, someone introduced a regression. And so bisection, Git has built in bisection functionality, which is actually really easy to use. And if you know how to do it, you can even script it up. So it'll just do the whole thing for you. So you can just tell Git, okay, this is good, this is bad. And it'll say, okay, check this one. And then you tell it, well, that was good. And so it'll say, okay, well, check this one, that was bad. And you just go back and forth. So you have a logarithmic thing to narrow in. And then it'll tell you, where's this change set? Because, before that it worked, right after that it didn't work, and so it's this change that made the problem. Now, if you have these patch series of 7 series, and somewhere in the middle, then the compile doesn't work. Now you've made my work as a bisection, trying to use the bisector, a lot more difficult, because now I'm so Git it's just going to choose something right in the middle, because that's the most efficient thing to do to get your log2 search space. And if that happens to be right in the middle where it doesn't compile, or where some other bit of functionality just randomly doesn't work, then it makes everyone's life a lot harder. I mean, we have automatic bisectors that will sort of like, do the same kind of thing. So in our testing infrastructure, if it worked here and it didn't work over there, the thing will automatically go through and then try and find it and send you an email. And if your patch series break in the middle, then that screws everything up. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So that's exactly why. So you want to make sure to have no regressions in the middle of a series, primarily for your bisection stuff. And that was it. Okay, so reviewing tips. So how do you actually do the review? So doing a review, it's unusually. You have to understand your mind, really grok in your mind what this person is trying to do before you can actually give useful information about how it's doing. So how do you find out what the patch is actually doing? So usually what I do is I have 3 different kind of views of the patch that I take. So the first, so the first thing is to say, code follows data, right? Code works on data, which means the data structures define what the code does. Does that make sense? So the most effective thing you can do usually to help understand what a patch is to look at the header files, the structures that have changed, right? It's frequently the case that if you understand what the structures have changed and why, you can immediately say, right, they've added this linked list in, and it's in this format, so therefore, I'm 85% sure that this is what the code is going to look like. And you look at that, and yes, that's exactly what the code is doing. So first, look at the code, try and figure out why they're changing the data structures, and then look at the data structures, find out why they're changing that, and then that will give you a big hint as to what the code is doing. There are ways to look at a patch that I sort of switch between when I'm trying to figure out what the patch is doing. Look at the diff itself, preferably in something that has a useful diff mode, so Emacs or Vim diff mode. Look at the change after the whole thing's been done. So it's sometimes the case. So if you're just looking at the file after it's been patched, you can't necessarily tell which part's been patched or not. If you're looking just at the diff itself, you often can't figure out what the final thing looks like. But switching back and forth between both gives you an idea of what's going on. And then finally, graphical meld or other graphical diff tools are really useful to sort of say, this thing changed into this. Yeah, so that's basically, that's what I have. So just here's a review of the review hierarchy. And with that, I will take any questions. Yeah, I mean, so we take our definition of act by and reviewed by from the Linux thing. And basically, a lot of people would just use the reviewed by. You as a maintainer, so you'd use act by either if in the past you've objected, and then someone comes back and says, okay, they argue against you, and then you say, right, that looks good. Then you say act by to say, all my concerns have been addressed. Or if you're a maintainer and you're just like, okay, this looks good, I trust you, just check it in. Okay, thank you.